grandma core, and is the resurgence of interest in traditionally feminine hobbies going to save us all? A couple of weeks ago, I was in Cornwall, sat around a campfire, swapping knitting patterns with some of the other girls at the party. It was lovely. Everyone in the circle had made or was going to make a bonnet for the colder weather. We recommended patterns, shared our favourite yarns, compared crochet hook sizes, and sat in this circle of women. I couldn't help but think, are we reclaiming the means of production right now? Because you may have noticed that fibre arts are having a real moment right now. When I say fibre arts, I mean you're knitting, crocheting, sewing. Before I carry on, my name is Sophie. I make videos about feminism and art and craft. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram at Sunland Studio, and I make little things like this as well. This little pin badge that I'm wearing, and if you're interested in this kind of content, you should subscribe to me to see more of it. Another month, another 2-word buzz phrase churned out by the trend cycle. This time, grandma core. This time heralded by models sat at the front row of a fashion show knitting together, suddenly making knitting with your friends the coolest thing a young woman could be doing, which I have intrinsically known for some time, but it was very interesting to see this put to the forefront of the culture. But these images make this seem very aspirational, and I keep stopping myself from using the word suddenly here because I actually don't think this has been sudden. And I also think that there are some innate contradictions at the heart of this trend that mean it isn't as revolutionary as I would like it to be, yet. So Heritage Crafts England lists endangered crafts on its website, skills that are being lost to time. So for example, and you might want to sit down before I tell you this, hat block and horse collar making are critically endangered. But knitting and crochet, no such concerns. They are absolutely thriving. And there's a lot to celebrate about this preservation of our great-great-great-grandmother's skills. We don't really know exactly when knitting and crochet originated, especially crochet, because a lot of the records were not properly kept. They were often passed down in an oral tradition, and they're not really written down because people didn't see it as something necessarily worth preserving. And if you're just teaching people face to face, you might not have needed to. So I love that now these traditions are maintained partly in chatty circles like I was sat in around this campfire, but also if you go onto Etsy or Ravelry or YouTube, you can find hundreds of thousands of patterns either for money or for free, reconnecting women and whoever fancies joining in with this skill taught by other women. These are glad tidings of much joy. And while I have my optimist hat on, I think to myself, surely if we're getting into this, it's going to change our consumption habits. If we're making our own clothes, carefully selecting the wools, taking time on the process to make something we care about, after you've done that, how can you with ease just pop into Zara and buy someone else's hard work for like no money? But one of the things that worries me here is that that just does not seem to be the case. And I'm not saying that to blame individual buyers. I do think individuals have some control, and I think if we act like they don't in any situation, it's quite disempowering. But I also believe that fast fashion companies are absolute vultures in any of these scenarios. So for example, in June 2024, ASOS was listing over 200 items tagged as crochet on their website. This morning I typed in the word crochet on Free People to look into this, and they have 324 crochet pieces of clothing. Now, if these are real crochet as opposed to cleverly done embroidery or knitting, it cannot be made by machine. This is the line crocheters always trot out, but crochet stitches as yet cannot be replicated by any machine. So someone is hand making that product that potentially you could buy for between £7 and £22 on ASOS. I think it is inescapable that the clothes you buy and wear say something about you, whether you want them to or not. So what are we saying if we buy this kind of crochet, or when we produce it? Because again, I don't want this to be about shaming individual people for buying something. So crochet nods towards the free-spirited fashion of the 1970s. That's when it had a real boom in popularity. People were trying to reject office culture and the mainstream, and crochet allowed for one-off unique pieces, making something new and different that had deep associations with alternative cultures. So when it is churned out by big mainstream companies uniformly, completely divorced from any appreciated creative process in that the person who made it is being paid nothing, it feels incredibly hollow to me. It's like the ghost of something radical. A postmodern impression of DIY culture that's designed to say, I'm creative, whilst completely divorcing you from any creative process. So then that makes me question, if this move towards more interest in fibre arts is encouraging fast fashion companies to try and recreate its aesthetic, is that a good thing? Is grandma core about creating things or just owning them? And also, are there any actual grandmas at this party? Because just who is making their own clothes? Well, it's largely middle-class women. To me, it ties very closely with the rise in hobby culture. If you're on TikTok or Instagram Reels, you've probably seen a lot of this, like just a girl and her hobbies, or showing you my hobby room. You know, showcasing your many stashes of bead making kits, yarn stashes, embroidery floss collections, or running gear. Now, I feel very aware as I say this that the call may be coming from inside the house, because if I love anything, it's a hobby. So if you're feeling judged by this, know that it is also a self-roast. And who can afford all these hobby collections? Well, the middle class. So you don't have to be extremely wealthy, but you do have to have disposable income. And I would say posting these online doesn't just signify your material wealth, it also suggests you have something everybody wants: time. Being time poor is so common, especially in working class households, or any household where both parties are working. There might be childcare. Women still do 90% of household tasks. Not me, but some women. So isn't the ultimate flex to show how much time you have on your hands? And I think what that might do is leave those who don't have the time and funds to cultivate these hobbies only being presented with the option of buying into the aesthetic enabled by the ASOS and Free Peoples of this world, and fast fashion companies cash in. And I don't think you can blame people for wanting to be part of this aesthetic, because I think it has a huge amount of social currency. Just as Regency era women would show off who had the tiniest embroidery stitches or who could take the loveliest turn around the room, I think middle class women are now competing over who can make the best sourdough bread and bring the nicest handmade scarf to the function. I've been at that party and it's a nice party, there's good food. And of course, who am I to say people aren't still deriving actual pleasure from these creative pursuits? I think it's an amazing feeling to be connected to making something with your hands, but I'm also a judgmental biatch, and that's why I'm making this video. Because obviously there's nothing wrong with any of these hobbies, but we can't really deny that if done right and by the right person, they can get you a lot of status and power online. In Pride and Prejudice, they debate over what makes an accomplished young woman and eventually agree, and I'm going to read this because there's just no way in hell I'm going to remember it. She must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, all the modern languages to deserve the word. And besides this, she must possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her address and expressions, or the word will be but half deserved. I read that very nicely. That was a first take. Oh my God, I'm an accomplished woman. When I read that, I think, what makes a woman worth following online today? I think in the most popular cases, she must be young, beautiful, never express an opinion in too strong of a way or in a way that, God forbid, makes her look ugly or unattractive. It's likely that she should have had surgery, but only in such a way that is unnoticeable enough that we applaud it rather than make fun of it. And she should have a comforting hobby that creates something beautiful but doesn't challenge our idea of what good art is that a woman should be making. Look, there's nothing wrong with being part of a dual income household with no kids and happening to have a lot of hot gluing supplies. If that's a crime, arrest me. And why shouldn't women celebrate creating something? You know, we're off our phones. Idle hands are the metaverse's playthings, and our hands are kept busy with our knitting needles. I do believe that this is giving value to a traditionally undervalued form of feminine art. And at the same time, having the added bonus of proving that actually women can do maths, because good luck trying to knit or crochet if you can't count. But as I look at the rise of grandma core and the popularity of knitting and crocheting, particularly on the internet, I can't help but notice who doesn't seem to be invited to this party. The popular image of the thin, white, blonde woman in her either navy or perhaps stone grey handmade jumper just isn't accessible to everybody, from the physical purchase of the yarns to the appearance of the person in the picture. And I notice echoes of the trad wife trend in the way this presents itself as well. A slide towards conservatism in the minimalism that's celebrated here, in the emphasis on natural products, none of which on their own are bad things. And I really don't want anyone's takeaway from this video to be that I think every girl who's made the petite knit Monday jumper is a bad person. I love the petite knit Monday jumper. But I'm just asking, who is most rewarded in status and following for making these things? I think luxury has become an integral part of this trend. So, for example, if you're not deeply enmeshed in the online knitting and crocheting community, the debate about natural versus unnatural fabrics rages on. So to sum it up, here we go. Acrylic yarn is much cheaper. It's easier to work with, and you can buy it almost anywhere from charity shops to WH Smith to actual craft shops. You're looking at about £2 to £4 for a large skein of the fabric. But acrylic is plastic. You're basically working with plastic. Traditional wool, like from a sheep, is a lot more aesthetically pleasing. It's often very coveted, may require specialist knowledge about how to use it, specialist websites to purchase it from, and it's a lot more money. I think you're very unlikely to get a ball of pure wool for less than £9. Often it's a lot more depending on the dyeing process and what kind of wool is in there. I love real wool, and it's practical in the sense that it doesn't hold a smell, but in other ways it's not very practical, so you can't wash it at a regular temperature in most cases, so you do need to be a very clean and demure young lady. So it's another status symbol. You're not doing something where you get dirty. You're not frequently dropping pasta in red sauce on yourself. Now this brings me round to what I like to call the plushie problem. You see, in this new world of grandma chic knits, if it's not Nordic and navy, we don't want it. So if you're making colourful accessories, I am on thin ice, let me tell you, or God forbid, soft toys, you are not in the cool girl club. Always strikes me as ironic considering how many of our actual grandmas and great aunts would have spent their time making us slightly cursed, misshapen toys. I know mine did. Yet in the yarn world, it is very common and acceptable to trash talk the plushie, bemoan its ubiquity at craft fairs, and add it to our things I would never make lists. Yet I ask myself, isn't the plushie in some ways the best representation of what is most undervalued about women's traditional craft? It's a non-utilitarian item made with love, often for a younger person as a sign of nurturing. None of that is me saying women have to intrinsically be into any of that stuff, but while we're talking about traits that are undermined, why not throw those in? Yes, these plushies are very often made with synthetic plastic fibres, but then isn't that what's most accessible to most people? And isn't that the same of the acrylic paints that artists wash down the sink all the time, right? It's all made from the same stuff. So why is this like a uniquely mockable and derided part of the grandma aesthetic? And yes, I would agree, another criticism often thrown at the plushies is they're repetitive. You follow a pattern and you see the same ones a lot. I, for example, have made this bee. But since when does a design having its basis in a pattern mean that it doesn't require skill? I mean, how many knitted Sophie scarves have we seen? How many people follow along to a Bob Ross landscape painting? How many people make a freaking chair? I assume they are all also following some sort of guideline, but that doesn't mean you don't bring your own skill and knowledge and learning to it. And I actually think that's one of the things that does get knitting and crochet most looked down on, is the idea that you're following someone else's pattern. It's not an art form that's maybe coming from you in every case, unless you design your own patterns. And whilst I do think designing your own pattern and making a pattern are different experiences and different skills, they both require the same time, practice, and I'm going to say it, talent to do well. And all crafts and tradespeople will be following a blueprint that's been set out for them in their specific area of expertise, but that doesn't mean they're not bringing their own skill to it. Whereas I think it's kind of assumed with women in the fabric world that you just like turn off some part of your brain and activate ladythink to just follow a pattern. And I actually can't follow a pattern, so how's that for ladythink? What really strikes me about the uptick in interest in fibre arts is the aesthetic tends to be thin, blonde, white women, wearing neutral knits, posting their wooden knitting needles on Instagram. And I'm not hating the player here. I play the game. I like posting what I make, it's fun for me, I enjoy sharing it, and it's also been a very forming experience in rejection therapy. But I think that Grandma Court, in its most mainstream form, is still giving us the same message that owning something and leaning into a certain aesthetic is what will make us finally feel good enough. The message isn't embrace your creativity, see what you enjoy, work with your hands. It's make this jumper look like this it girl. Or if you don't have the time and money to do that, buy this dupe. And there's no celebration of the elderly here, the people that handed down these skills. A girl in her freshly blocked jumper appears next to a post about a celebrity who's had her whole face peeled off and reattached just slightly higher up this time. Like any art, fibre arts do have the potential for disruption. Protest quilts, storytelling, visibility. I mean, just thinking about the pride flag, like that was someone working creatively to protest and draw attention to a community. Even just the fact that it's historically been the only female-dominated art form and the only one controlled and handed on by women rather than barring women from joining. But when these crafts are reduced to a buzz phrase, a purchasable aesthetic, they lose their power and meaning. Because these are not the grandmas that I was promised. There are no wrinkles here, no errors, no scrap projects from a charity shop. Error and mistakes and imperfections, those things that are at the very heart of creativity, aren't getting a look in. Back to the circle of women I was sat with at the party. Someone remarked how now you could just even ask an AI to write you a pattern. And I thought to myself, God forbid that we just pay some weird girl with a micro fringe £3. Or if you can't spring for that, find a different weird girl who's made a free YouTube tutorial out of the kindness of her heart. Because if AI kills off the art girls, who will Elon Musk marry next? I think this sums up the individualism we're being encouraged to buy into here. This idea that like, well, I can get the pattern I want and I can make the jumper that makes me look the coolest. This isn't grandma core, this is the destruction of a community in favour of convenience and individual gain and access to an impression of creativity. If we're coming to fibre arts, it needs to be with a little bit of respect. We need to take our shoes off at the door and not pour out a bottle of water for a robot to make us a pattern when there are literally hundreds of thousands of patterns online, mostly written by women, just waiting for us. Again, none of this is to girl boss gatekeep the fibre arts community. The more the merrier, and I do stand by it being a beautiful thing that more people are connecting to their creativity and what they can do with their hands. What I object to is companies cashing in on this and trying to sell us back something that actually only we can make. I don't think it's too much to ask to say that art should be about creating, dreaming, wondering, resisting. I know that we're all busy and this seems like a lot to squeeze into an evening, but maybe 3 out of 5 would be good to aim for. So let's work together to buy an actual pattern. Let's make something from scraps or secondhand materials or just that isn't perfect. You can make a classy pullover or a plushie if you prefer. Make something that makes you feel delighted. Let's join yarn clubs and teach other people these skills so that they don't feel the need to learn it from a robot who just stole those skills from people online anyway. Let's wear a robe and feed the pigeon. Try not to worry that your frown lines will deepen when you count your stitches. And for the love of God, do some wrist exercises, because one thing that Grandma Core has got right is we are all on track for arthritis. This has been something I've been thinking about for a really long time, and I've really struggled to connect the arguments in my head. I would have like half of a thought, tale as old as time, and then just really struggled to think about how this connected in with the rest of it. So I would think about how we are selling more crochet stuff on fast fashion websites because people are getting into crochet, but really struggle to link that to the idea of like the history of women's crafts and them being undervalued. So I'm glad that I finally got this together, and I hope that it made some kind of sense. Anyway, I'd be really interested to hear you guys' opinions on this and how we can resist the grand culture and tradition of fibre arts just being turned into something you can tag on a fashion website so that you can buy it. And I will be back with another video soon. Bye!